When I was first introduced to professional wrestling as a very small child, right away, right off the bat, I was told that it was all fake. It was just something that I've always known, and I doubt I'm alone in all that. Wrestling fans have always seemed to just know, and the wrestling industry itself seems to know that we all know. But yet, it still took a very long and winding road before the professional wrestling industry officially came clean and admitted to what we already all knew all along. Either way, it was a path that eventually led to right here as the topic of this episode, because today, Dave knows the end of kayfabe. So when did the professional wrestling business first let the cat out the bag? Well, there's a few possible answers. To start, some would argue that once moves like the vertical suplex, the pile driver, or even just punches in general all became a part of pro wrestling, well, that was the industry telling us that the whole thing was just a show. I mean, we know what a punch can do, and we know that a vertical suplex isn't exactly something that happens during a real fight, and we also know that a pile driver can do some really serious damage. And with moves that either look very choreographed or moves that would send someone to the hospital if done for real, all being done on a regular basis, well, that's just telling us that something had to be up. In addition, when gimmicks began showing up and getting more and more over the top, it's hard to think that anyone wouldn't be able to tell right away that this whole thing wasn't just one big performance. There have also been other implied signs of wrestling not being a legitimate contest. For example, in the 1930s, Wrigley Field hosted a show billed as the last great shooting match. And while not directly saying that all of wrestling is a work, when you call your match a shoot, you might as well be. Oh, and by the way, that match in reality was also a work itself. But for a more concrete moment of breaking kayfabe, we have to turn to Satoru Sayama, better known as Tiger Mask. Sayama, as I've covered before, left the business for a period of time after getting fed up with the backstage politics and after a match with Akira Maeda turned into a shoot. Upon quitting, he had a tell-all book published detailing his experiences in the wrestling industry and exposing the business. Now, this really wasn't as earth-shattering as the industry had always feared. People made it sound like as soon as someone broke kayfabe, it would ripple around the globe and the wizard would be revealed behind the curtain. They thought that there was no way you could ever put the genie back into the bottle. But alas, not exactly. Because the thing is, this was a Japanese book. Back in the days before Kindle, it's not like a lot of people knew that the book came out or even had access to such a publication. And since it was Japanese, many people couldn't exactly read it even if they wanted to or even if they knew that the book existed in the first place. Another example of an illusion-shattering moment in wrestling happened in 1987 when rivals Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik were arrested while driving together in the same car. However, as exposing as all this was, there is yet another, more direct and more infamous moment that most people think of when they think about the day that kayfabe came crashing down. February 10th, 1989. Because it was on this day that Vince McMahon himself testified before the New Jersey State Senate that wrestling was not a legitimate sport. Now, backtracking a little bit, ever since Vincent Kennedy McMahon took over the company from his father, he began slowly transitioning into his McMahonisms that we all know today. He started leaning more on terms like entertainment and less on terms like wrestling, until eventually landing on the phrase sports entertainment. And wrestling being entertainment became McMahon's official admission on that February day in New Jersey. But why did Vince fess up to all this? Well, as it turns out, it all has to do with rules and regulations. Because as a legitimate sport, professional wrestling would fall under the jurisdiction of state athletic commissions or any other governing body designed to regulate sports. Now, the rules and specifics, and even what these organizations are called, vary from state to state. So I'm not going to get into all of them. But for example, the New York State Athletic Commission deals exclusively with the exhibitions of unarmed combat, like boxing, MMA, and wrestling. But surprisingly, not other sports such as basketball or baseball, which I think is pretty weird. Anyway, state athletic regulations can require all sorts of things for a professional wrestling promotion. They may require that all of the wrestlers themselves have to be licensed by the state. They might maintain that wrestlers have to pass medical testing as administered by state-approved medical personnel. They could also require that an ambulance has to be present at the show. And they could require fees and also penalties if any of these regulations are not met. Not to mention a whole host of other possible rules. And sure, a lot of these do make good sense and may even be a good thing. But a lot of it isn't free. So Vince McMahon decided that while rules like these might apply for things like boxing, they have no business in professional wrestling. Which is why, leading up to this, Vince and Linda McMahon had been working hard to get wrestling deregulated for a while at this point. WWF wanted to have as much control as possible over their own product. They wanted to be the ones to decide what was best for their business, and they also didn't want to pay thousands of dollars in fees if they didn't have to. Then, after all of these struggles had failed, Vince McMahon had one big play left to achieve his goal. He felt he had to do the unthinkable. He had to admit to what everyone already knew. He, the head of the World Wrestling Federation, the biggest wrestling company in the entire world, had to confess that professional wrestling was not a legitimate sporting contest, but merely entertainment. And after he did so in front of the New Jersey State Senate in 1989, by a vote of 37-1, professional wrestling officially became deregulated. This changed the business forever. Now again, things vary from state to state, so some regulations here and there might still apply. But going forward from that February day and going to other states, this opened up things for the business as a whole. Promoters in certain areas were now able to create promotions without needing to have as much startup capital for fees, and they also didn't have to meet any standards if they were not regulated, thus making it a lot easier for people to create their own wrestling companies. And again, this all came from simply admitting something that everybody already knew. However, this was not all met with praise. Many among the wrestling community were irate at McMahon for exposing the business. They feared that even though everyone knew wrestling wasn't legitimate, by admitting it, you remove some of the magic, and that wrestling would never ever be the same again. And well, it hasn't been. But is that for the better or for the worse? Let me know how you feel about the end of kayfabe down in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.